A very good morning to all of our attendees. We would like to say thank you very much for tuning into the IOPSA Tuesday morning Toolbox Talks. As always, we start with the tips to continually prevent COVID-19. The cheapest and simplest way to avoid getting bacteria and viruses or even cross-contaminating surfaces is to wash our hands. So we encourage you to do this not just for COVID, but for other occupational diseases as well, and the prevention of other bacteria and viruses that we might find on a day-to-day basis, especially with you in plumbing. If you cannot wash your hands for 20 seconds with regular soap and water, try and keep that alcohol-based hand sanitizer available. They are a lot cheaper now that COVID is not in full force, so we can always keep this as a good backup in our vehicles. Then if you haven't washed your hands, please avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Obviously, this is how we spread germs, spread viruses and bacteria, especially if we're going to be cross-contaminating our workspace. In other words, we touching the work where we're working, then we touch the tools, we touch the equipment, we touch our cell phones, we touch our vehicles, and if we haven't washed our hands or wiped down and disinfected these objects and surfaces that we are touching, there is a high possibility that we could end up touching our face, our nose, our eyes, or our mouth with unwashed hands and then potentially infect ourselves. If you do have somebody that is sick, please get them to go and see the doctor. Book them off on sick leave and avoid them if possible. Try adhere to your social distancing. And if you are coughing, maybe even with change of season, please cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow. Or if you are using a tissue, please make sure you throw that tissue into the bin. And then if you haven't as yet, which we all should have as companies in South Africa, a policy on COVID-19 vaccination and what you are going to do for your company when it comes to COVID. Now, this morning, we are looking at Legionella or Legionnaire's disease, and we're going to find out exactly what Legionella is and is it preventable and what are the 5 steps that you can take as a plumber to ensure that you protect yourselves, your employees, your families. Most importantly, we are thinking of your clients. A lot of your clients don't understand that they must have a Legionella plan in place, and this is according to law. Legionella, or the bacteria of Legionella, actually falls within the hazardous biological agents. Now, it's a very broad regulation, so it doesn't speak about Legionella specifically, but because it does fall within the hazardous biological agents regulations, it is something that clients should actually have in place. Much like any health and safety management system, they might buck against it, but for those who understand the dangers of Legionella, which comes from good education from our plumbers toward our clients, we can then maybe start setting up proper Legionella plans to protect the consumers of the water on the end point. As always, we want to say thank you very much from the Institute of Plumbing South Africa to all of our members. And if you do need to get in touch with us, safety@iopsa.org is the email address you want to use. If you want to get in touch with OHSS Consulting or myself, you can get in touch with us on info@ohss.co.za or on our WhatsApp number currently. We won't be able to take any phone calls at the moment. But if you do want to get in touch with us on WhatsApp, even WhatsApp calling, we are available on 071-875-2070. Then these Toolbox Talks are accredited with CPD points. So if you are a SIOSH member, you can claim a CPD point for each Toolbox Talk. And then if you are a PRB member, you can claim 1 CPD point for all 4 of the Toolbox Talks that you join within the month. So that is 0.25 CPD points per Toolbox Talk. Our safety thought for this week, thinking of Legionella, is prevention is better than cure. That is something we all know. It's a very well-known statement. But what is Legionella and how is it actually spread? What can we do to prevent Legionella? So Legionella bacteria are found naturally in water. That bacteria is basically, it's a breeding ground within soil and water, and it's found all over the world. It's not something that we would eradicate because it's a natural forming bacteria. Now, this type of bacteria is a pathogenic group of gram-negative bacteria. Now, what that basically means is it's able to cause illnesses. Now, one of the illnesses it causes is legionellosis or Legionnaire's disease, as well as a mild flu-like illness called Pontiac fever. So as you can see on the left-hand side, Legionella can be inhaled or it can be aspirated in water. So it's either inhaled through the soil that we maybe move. If you are digging if you are grinding near soil, if you even doing excavation near soil, or even moving soil around, and there could be potential particles of this bacteria in the soil around us, you would then be able to breathe this in and it would sit on your lungs, and at the correct amount of bacteria, this could spore open and turn into Legionnaire's disease, or potentially Pontiac fever. And we'll explain the difference between the two. But also in water, if it is aspirated, which a lot of taps nowadays, when you open the tap, it actually aspirates the water as well. And this is to make the water a little bit softer. Those little end pieces on the taps normally aspirate the water, and then this comes out of the tap. Or if we're drinking water, and there is a potential for that aspiration to then also be inhaled. So you can see that there are many ways of getting this into our bodies, and by air or by drinking water or aspirated water. This could even be while we're in the shower, while running a bath, while in a steam room, standing around a water fountain. There's so many areas available that water is always aspirated, that you are breathing in all the time. Now, this bacteria obviously will then, sit on your body, or sit on your lungs specifically, and this could create one of two things. As we said, a Pontiac fever, which the definition of this is a mild systematic disease with symptoms resembling influenza, probably caused by a Legionella infection. So because they do not 100% know the difference on the outside, if it's flu or if it's Pontiac fever, a lot of people just think, well, I'm getting the seasonal flu. It's that time of the year, and if they do get the flu at other times of the year, well, there's no real concern. And the reason why there's no real concern is because they think it's just the general flu. But it could be that they are being infected by this Legionella bacteria throughout the year, because they are performing certain functions throughout the year that is exposing them to the Legionnaire's disease, or perhaps the geysers that they are using, or even the water points that they are using, they are not maintaining it correctly. And that is because they've got to pay you, the plumber, to come out to ensure that maintenance is done properly on their plumbing. And because they are not performing any maintenance on their plumbing, there is a very big possibility, or very big chance, that this Pontiac fever could turn into something more severe, which we'll see in the next slide. But your symptoms, if you'll notice, for Pontiac fever is very similar to the flu. Moderate to severe flu, loss of strength, high fever and chills, muscle pain, headaches, joint pain, diarrhea, difficulty breathing, or a dry cough. This is all very similar to somebody having the seasonal flu. And that could be disguised as the flu, but could potentially be Pontiac fever. So symptoms here will appear from 2 to 5 days after infection with this Legionella's bacteria. But it could develop into something more serious. Legionnaire's disease is a type of pneumonia caused by the Legionella bacteria. Now, these symptoms, you'll notice, are very similar in the first instance to your Pontiac fever, such as your moderate to severe influenza, loss of strength, high fever and chills, muscle pain. But you'll notice that it starts getting worse. You'll start getting renal failure, joint pain, diarrhea, non-productive, or dry cough. This could actually lead to fatalities if it is not looked after properly. So it is critical to get somebody who has Legionnaire's disease to the hospital to get the right type of medication. Fortunately, it is something that is preventable in proper maintenance of plumbing. Preventable also, if you do get it, that they are able to assist you at hospitals to be able to get rid of the Legionnaire's disease. And again, symptoms will appear within 2 to 5 days of being affected with this Legionnaire's bacteria. But Legionella's bacteria, or the Legionnaire's disease, whether it forms a part of the pneumonia type or even the lighter type of Pontiac's fever, can affect anyone. So there is a very big possibility, a high possibility, that it has already affected the majority of the world to very low degrees. Principally, though, we are most susceptible if you are a lot older, if you are perhaps already ill, if you have immunosuppression. We know and understand all of these terminologies now due to COVID and how COVID attacked persons who were already sick because of other risk factors, especially for COVID-19. We had those who had problems with their lungs, and this is a lung disease because Legionellosis actually attaches itself to the lung. So those obviously who are suffering with any type of immunocompromised disease will then have a higher possibility of getting the pneumonia type Legionnaire's disease compared to Pontiac's fever. Now, water obviously is where Legionella bacteria is found, and this is where we are working every day. As a plumber, you are essentially ensuring that clean running water is entering that building. But if maintenance is not being done, how clean is that water after a certain period of time? And this is where the education of our clients is paramount to getting them to understand how important it is to have a maintenance plan, a maintenance schedule in place to ensure that someone who is competent and understands how these bacteria and diseases can spread throughout a building and potentially throughout the entire water source of the building. It won't just be one tap that's affected. It'll be the water source, because that is where Legionella will start constantly developing. So obviously we look at things like cooling towers, water systems in hotels, homes, factories, any fountains, misting devices, spa pools. All of that has a potential to have a breeding ground for the Legionella bacteria. Now, about 20% of the cases that Legionellosis was detected in Europe are considered to be travel-related. But these cases present a particular set of problems because of the difficulties in identifying the source of infection. So it's very difficult for us to identify where this Legionella bacteria was picked up from, because it is so widely available in soil, air, and water that is all around us. So because it's got such a high percentage, it means that it's quite high on our risk categories. Although we are not at high risk of serious injury or death from it, those who are more likely, such as those a lot older, ill, or have other risk factors because of immune compromising or immune suppression type of illnesses, we would never understand whether the risk assessment is fully covering all of our employees. So this is something to keep in mind. When we look at risk assessments, a lot of times we are looking at a risk assessment from the viewpoint of a scope of work. So we are installing plumbing. We're looking at the risk as using hand tools, using power tools, using a ladder, or potentially even using scaffolding, or working in a roof or a ceiling, and then working at heights would come into play. But something that we forget is to identify the person or the individual who might be more at risk than others. You see, we take a whole team and we say the team has these risks associated with it, but it's more based on scope of work. Now, with a new bill that's come out for the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there is an amendment to what a risk assessment actually is and how a risk assessment must be done. So for those of you who are joining our Prime program, perhaps you've been waiting for the higher part of the Prime program, which is currently being revised because of the new OHS Act bill, which we're going to discuss next week. You will notice that we're going to focus on a lot of looking at individuals within the company, identifying those who might be more susceptible to the risks and hazards. And that is why it is very important for us to do an overall risk management plan. That is to identify the hazards and then assess the risk, but also including each individual person, even if you put them into categories. This is not isolating persons or separating persons. It's just ensuring that each person's category of risk is actually identified. You might think that's a lot of work, but it's actually very simple. And once you've done it the first time, it's going to be a lot easier moving into your safety management system throughout the next year. So, is it dangerous? Yes, it is. It has the potential to cause severe injury and death as well. So when this Legionella bacteria is exposed to the body, what basically happens is it attaches itself to the lungs. And there on the circle on the right-hand side, you can see the alveoli is what is responsible for removing dust in our lungs. that is where it attaches itself. This bacteria will then attach itself to these little alveoli. And what it does, as you can see on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, is you'll have the bacteria with inside a little protective vacuole. So it creates this vacuole on its own. And then with inside this little protection, it starts multiplying. And when it gets big enough and strong enough that your immune system cannot damage it, it will then break this protective vacuole and then infect the rest of our body. And this will then come out as one of two diseases. Most often, and they say 95% of the time, it will come out as Pontiac fever. And that is because it's not as dangerous to our immune system. However, in that 5% case where somebody actually gets Legionnaire's disease, which is that pneumonia type of illness, there are serious repercussions later on, especially because their immune system is going to be compromised. And because it's attacking their lungs, they are susceptible to perhaps even getting other types of diseases because of the immunosuppression that they are facing. Then you go into antibiotics, which also, to a degree, reduces your immune system as well. And you can see that later on, somebody who perhaps is already suffering with long COVID or after effects of COVID that's already affected their lungs, you can just see how dangerous it is for a person in that weak state, or that point of lung capacity is already weakened. This could then weaken it even further. And in very rare cases, we have had people dying from Legionnaire's disease. But again, it is preventable, 100% preventable, actually. Legionnaire's disease, because it is naturally occurring, we need to ensure that we have a proper plan. Now, this is something that we need to understand. It is 100% preventable. All our clients need to understand is that they must have a proper system in place. And this is to prevent the growth, the spread, and the contamination of this Legionella bacteria. So we look at water temperatures, the cleanliness of the source, the cleanliness of the plumbing, the cleanliness of the endpoints. Most clients are not actually opening up their plumbing points at the endpoint to clean them out, to make sure they're being sterilized. The shower heads aren't being disinfected, and a lot of sediment or scale can build up in there, and this is where the breeding ground for this bacteria lies. So educating your clients on this type of information and explaining to them the importance of having management systems is not only going to boost revenue for you as a plumber, because it's going to allow you to go back and do a proper maintenance system with your clients. And yes, it is going to cost your clients, but what is better, prevention or cure? You see, if you do it right and you design your management system in the correct way, especially going back to your client and doing a proper Legionnaire's plan, putting it in place, they will see the benefit of that. And a lot of people will then acknowledge why it is important. They might not take it on. We understand that. But those who do will then definitely see a remarkable difference in the cleanliness of their water, especially because that is what we are using on a day-to-day basis. So things like water temperatures, and as a plumber, you already know that. When you're doing your installations, you need to ensure the temperature of your water is at the correct temperature. The water systems need to be recirculated, especially if it's stored. You obviously need to have it cleaned out pretty often as well. And then it is obviously possible for it to be dispensed through some of the actuators that you're using within plumbing, or sometimes there's different types of connectors to the actual water points that can aspirate the water a little bit more. These are little areas and points that we want to encourage our clients to be aware of. But obviously, if you're protecting it at the source and making sure that this Legionella bacteria is not growing within the actual water point, the water stations, or the water side from the plumbing side, then the end point will obviously be clean as well. So again, we need to take a look at monthly inspections that our client can do. What about quarterly inspections that you could potentially come out and do? And then your annual inspections and cleanouts of your various water storages. These are systems that you can actually put in place. A Legionella plan for your clients. go to them, explain to them the dangers of Legionnaire's disease and why it is so important to have this plan in place. Then show them how you as a plumber would encourage them or assist them in getting this done correctly. So really it's a growth opportunity for your company. And here's the 5 basic principles that you can set in place to prevent Legionnaire's disease. The first thing you want to do is always do a risk assessment. So this is the identification and assessment of the source of the risk. So where are the points within the buildings, within the whole water drawing, where there is a potential for Legionella bacteria to grow? Where are the areas where water is sitting for a long time, water being stored? Where are the points where the water is coming in, and what type of temperature is that water at? What type of temperature is coming out at the end point? But not just at the end point, from the source to the end point, you also need to look at it from different intervals, because at each interval, there might be growth patterns between the source and the end point, where the source is fine and the end point is fine, but somewhere in between, the temperature is being changed to be the correct temperature for Legionnaire's disease to actually grow, or the bacteria rather, to grow. Then you need to prepare a risk plan. So a risk plan is very simple, very basic. You've identified where the water point sections are, where there is a high possibility for the growth. So what do you say in your risk plan? Well, we need to obviously control that. It could be a monthly inspection to check the actual water points, the end points. It could be a temperature check every month to ensure that the correct temperatures of the flowing water are arriving at the end point correctly. You could even test the quality of that water. And this would all be in the actual control plan, whatever you feel is necessary to prevent the growth of bacteria. Then you want to implement it. And once you've implemented, this is going to be a monthly, a quarterly, and a yearly inspection. And it's not going to be a very paper-based system. It's not going to be a very timelier system, but it is going to be a very beneficial system. So something very simple can 100% eradicate the potential for them to even suffer with Pontiac fever, never mind Legionnaire's disease. Then you must manage it. Somebody must be on top of ensuring that these things are done every month, every quarter, and every year. Then it also needs to be monitored. Now, you want to monitor it in the way that you want to see, is there potential for any changes within the system that's being done, any maintenance work that has been done throughout the year, but perhaps you're not the plumber actually doing the maintenance on site. Maybe they have their own maintenance team. Is the maintenance team perhaps increasing the risk by changing things, changing endpoints, removing plumbing, changing plumbing, and potentially creating another source of potential issue? So these monitorings will obviously have to come down to a maintenance system that is not just on the cleanliness of the plumbing, but also on the maintenance of the plumbing as itself, or even water points or water storage tanks. Then keeping records. Make sure that you have it in a Legionnaire safety file, if you will. You could have this digital as well that you could share across the board with yourself, your team, as well as your client. And then once you've designed that plan, you copy and paste that plan and try and assist other clients as well. Then please remember, within the company, the client itself, somebody with a managerial position should actually be responsible for this. Because it does fall within the hazardous biological agents regulations, it does mean that somebody in a higher point within the company has to be appointed as perhaps a Legionnaire's inspector, somebody within your client's company. You could also appoint somebody in your own company within plumbing that is responsible for ensuring your clients have this information. Share with them the actual Toolbox Talk as well. If you want this information on all the slides, or the information that we have on Legionella's disease, we will welcome you to just email us, let us know what information you do want, and we will gladly send that through to you as well. So we thank you very much for joining us this morning for our Toolbox Talk. Next week, please tune in. We are going to be taking a look at the new OHS Act bill that's going to be coming into place next year. Yes, it is finalized, and no, it's not out. So there have been questions, well, is it in place at the moment? Why are we changing our prime course for risk management if the new OHS Act bill is not enacted yet. Well, here's the thing. When the construction regulations had been revised, there was a certain period of time that we were allowed to comment on those regulations. And once that time frame for commenting ended, it was pretty much set in stone that those were going to be the construction regulations. And so we just waited for it to actually become enacted or enforced, if we can put it that way. The new OHS Act bill has already been set out. It came out already in 2020, so it's been more than enough time for people to comment on it. In fact, SIOSH was constantly asking for those to comment on it. There's still a lot of questions we have about the new OHS Act bill, so we are trying to look into this. However, there are certain sections that we deem 100% necessary to be definitely enacted, and it's specifically on the risk management side for myself personally, and that is why we've decided to readjust or take a look at the HIRA program within Prime, and then just adjust certain understandings and the methodology of doing risk management. And that is so IOPSA can ensure that its members are at the forefront of anything. In this case, it's going to be occupational health and safety. And then we've also adjusted the last program of the Prime program so that when you finish Prime in February, March next year, you will then be able to start designing your own safety management system, which you'll tune in next week, Tuesday, to find out why the big change of Section 7 to the OSH Act is so important. The old Section 7 was having a health and safety policy, one document for your company. The new bill states that Section 7, you must have a safety management system with all elements that are interlinked throughout your documentation. This is a lot more in-depth safety management that is required, and it is already enforced. It is something that is going to be enacted next year, and it's going to be something that you have to do as every single company. This is not when a client asks you for a safety file. This is your own personal company safety file. We've already designed one for release next year for all of our member plumbers. So if you're not an IOPSA member, find out how you can become a member, because all of this will be coming to you free of charge to any IOPSA member. This is to ensure that all of our plumbers are 100% compliant in the next year. And we will definitely work with you. We are looking forward to assisting as many of our plumbers in the mentorship program to get you legally compliant within the next year. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you next week. Please remember, prevention is better than cure. Have a safe week, and we'll hand it over back to you, Karim.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this informative session. I believe there are no questions from the attendees this morning. Is there anything you'd like to add before I end off, Chris?
Just a very big thank you to yourself, as well as all of our attendees and those who are attending the Prime course. If you're not on the Prime course yet, remember it's a 15,000 Rand safety management course that has been designed for IOPSA or plumbers specifically. And for any IOPSA member, you receive that 15,000 Rand course free of charge. So if you haven't registered yet, please get in touch with us, register for that course. The first 3 courses are already available for you. And then the HIRA course, which is being revised, is going to be revised in the next few weeks. But we do have approval to put you on the next course, which is Incident Management Basics. And that's going to be sent out this week. Thank you very much.